I love co-op gaming. And the reason I made this channel is because I want to talk about and recommend co-op games that other people aren't talking about. Let's talk about some couch co-op hidden gems. Shadow of the Colossus has always been one of my favorite games of all time. From the cryptic storytelling to the exploration and massive boss battles, this game is a piece of art. I always wondered what it'd be like if there was a Shadow of the Colossus that was co-op. With the help of today's sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University, maybe someone will be able to finally step up and make that co-op Shadow of the Colossus-like game that I've been waiting for. Southern New Hampshire University's online game development program gives you the knowledge and experience to create your own video games and help turn it into an actual career with opportunities for growth. You'll learn how to bring your characters and environments to life with 2D and 3D modeling, texturing, and game physics. You'll learn how to create dynamic and challenging experiences for your players with game AI. You'll learn how to create flawless user experiences by learning successful interface design. You'll also learn the 3 major computer programming languages: C++, C#, and Java, the pillars to every great game. Your courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you'll have opportunities to connect with people in the industry. And when you graduate, SNHU will still be there to help you as you begin your job hunt. SNHU is accredited, nonprofit, and has radically affordable tuition. SNHU was voted one of the country's most innovative universities by US News and World Report. Go to snhu.edu/classic, also linked in the description of the video, to see if you qualify for SNHU's game development program. You might be eligible for financial aid or have previous college credits that could fast-track your degree at SNHU. Click the link to get started. Now let's talk about some co-op hidden gems. The first game I want to talk about is called Magicoal. This came out on the PC Engine CD, which in and of itself is already an uncommon console. But the fact that this game came out exclusively in Japan and was also never translated into English makes this game even more obscure. It plays like an action RPG, not unlike Legend of Zelda or Secret of Mana. You can play as this little wizard boy and a girl. Unfortunately, there's still not a fan translation of this game. There is quite the language barrier, which is kind of a problem, as there's a lot of text here. I've been able to mess around with this game a bit and kind of just stumble my way through, so the game isn't completely unplayable. And when it comes to the action, you definitely don't need to read anything. Hopefully we could see a fan translation in the near future. But yeah, this is a game I never hear anyone talk about, and I just love seeing co-op RPGs. Fortified Zone isn't necessarily a rare game, but it's the 2-player co-op mode that isn't often talked about, and that's because it came out on the Game Boy. So you needed 2 Game Boys and a link cable, as well as 2 copies of the game. So that barrier to entry, I think, prevented a lot of people from actually picking this game up and playing it. This one plays like a mix between an old school Zelda game and Contra. It's a dungeon crawler, and you have guns. The best part about this game is you can split up, as you each have your own screen to look at, so you're able to go through and eliminate the enemies on your own, or stick together if you want. This is one of my favorite co-op games on the Game Boy. Zenki is another game that came out on a very obscure console made by NEC, the PC-FX. This is the 32-bit follow-up to the PC Engine. Unfortunately, the majority of the games that came out on this console were graphic novels, but there are a couple of hidden gems as well, and this is at the top of the list. It's a side-scrolling action game with beat-em-up-like gameplay. The visuals here are a highlight, and the 2-player co-op gameplay definitely makes it worth trying out, as you each have different abilities. The main character specializes in close combat, and the second player, who can control the girl, I don't know her name, has long-distance abilities. So when you play it in 2-player, you're able to work together to make a stronger defense against the enemies. Unfortunately, this game is incredibly expensive. The PC-FX is definitely not a common console to come by, so your best bet is to just emulate this one. But if you do have a PC-FX, there is no copy protection, so you can just burn games. And that's how I was able to play this one on original hardware. So on the off chance you actually have a PC-FX, this is one of maybe 3 games that is actually worth playing, so try it out. Tempest 2000 is another game that is most likely not a hidden gem, but the 2-player co-op mode is part of the game that I never hear anyone talk about. The version that I'm used to playing is on the Atari Jaguar, which is in my opinion the best game on that system. And it's made even better if you have 2 modified spinner controllers. So then it ends up playing just like the original arcade Tempest. The gameplay is simple, you just move around the shape, shooting down all the aliens. It's definitely a unique take on the old school space shooter. This game was also released on the PS1, as well as the Sega Saturn. N2O is an exclusive game that came out on the PS1. I never hear anybody talk about this game. It's kind of like Tempest on crack, and of course you can play it in 2-player co-op. And there's a couple of different modes. The main one, you could be on the same screen and you work together, spinning around in the tunnel, taking out all the enemies. The music is definitely a highlight. It's just upbeat, fast-paced, pretty intense techno music, and it's perfect for this game. There's also a split screen mode, so now you can move independently and you're not stuck to the same screen. But the downside of this mode is you end up just separating in the tunnel and not really working together too much. So I prefer the single screen option. But this is a game that no one ever talks about, so I highly recommend you try this one. Another game on the PS1 is Gamera 2000. This came out exclusively in Japan. This is kind of like the PlayStation's answer to Panzer Dragoon, but it has a 2-player co-op option. The first player controls the main character, and the second controller controls Gamera, who's usually off-screen, but is able to assist by using the second cursor. This works surprisingly well. This is really one of my favorite on-rail shooters, and the live action cutscenes are a great addition as well. Definitely give this one a try. 7 Mansions came out exclusively in Japan. I've talked about this game numerous times on the channel, so this might be the last time I decide to talk about it. But in case you missed it and you haven't seen it in my other videos, a few years ago a fan translation was released. So everyone in the English-speaking countries can finally enjoy this co-op survival horror game. The game is pretty janky. It has its problems, but just the fact that it can be played in 2-player co-op and it's a survival horror game, it's definitely worth trying out. It's not unlike Silent Hill or Resident Evil. You're gonna have lots of puzzles and slow, clunky combat, but the game really shines in co-op. Anyway, I've talked about this game a lot. I highly recommend it. It might be the first co-op survival horror game ever. Now let's talk about Xybots. This game came out in the arcades, and there's a bootleg version that came out on the NES. But the version that I want to talk about is the Atari Lynx version. Again, Xybots in and of itself might not be a hidden gem, but the Atari Lynx version, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about. Of course, you do need 2 Atari Lynx consoles and 2 copies of the game, as well as the link cable. In the other versions of the game, it plays in split screen, where you can run around either together or split up and take on all of the enemies. This is kind of an early example of a third-person shooter. It works really well on the Atari Lynx, as you each have your own screen now. I'm just very fascinated by this console, because it came out to compete with the Game Boy and the Game Gear, but technically speaking, it was way ahead of both of those consoles. This looks like 16-bit graphics, like some of these games could have been on the Sega Genesis. If you have the means to try this one out, especially on the Atari Lynx, give it a shot, or just maybe emulate the arcade version. You can't go wrong with that one either. Okay, let's talk about a new game. This is an indie game that came out in 2021 called Voyage, and I think it went under a lot of people's radar, but it's one of my favorite co-op games in recent memory. It doesn't have a lot of challenge. That's not what the game is about. It's just about experiencing what this world has to offer, and especially with a friend. It's best to be played in one sitting. There's no combat, and the puzzles are pretty simple, but where this game truly shines is the bond you feel with your partner in the game. You can even give each other a hug for no apparent reason. This is one of those games that could be classified as an art game, as there's 0 dialogue in the entire game, and the story is told just through actions. I really love games like this. The art style is beautiful, the soundscape and music is always fitting to the setting. If you're looking for a newer co-op indie game, definitely give Voyage a try, especially if you like art games. games like Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, or Journey, or Gris. This one fits in pretty well with those types of games. And the final game that I wanted to talk about is called Run Saber, and it came out on the Super Nintendo. This is one of those games that I did not grow up with. I found out about much later, just through YouTube videos. But it's quickly become one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. It's often compared to Strider, but with co-op, and I feel like that's a fair comparison. Your characters can move around pretty quickly, and they're agile like in Strider. You can climb on the ceiling, you can climb on the walls. One of the coolest parts about this game are the massive boss fights, especially this one on the plane where you're spinning all around, hanging on for dear life. I don't know why this game is often left out when talking about co-op Super Nintendo games, as it's really one of the best on the system, and I can't recommend it enough. So those are 10 couch co-op hidden gems. I definitely plan on doing more videos like this. So if there are any games that I missed, maybe you'll see it in a future video. But what are some of your favorite co-op hidden gems? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, check out our video from last week where we talked about co-op cozy games. And thank you for watching.